Okay, welcome to the final chapter of our chemistry class. So we are going to be talking about eating, which is great. So it's a metabolic pathways and energy production, okay? So for this one, it says which stage of metabolism involves the digestion of polysaccharides. And remember, go back to those root words. Poly means more than two, saccharides means sugar, okay? And actually sugar starts to be digested in the mouth. This is on page 620 of my version of the textbook, which I know is a different version than yours. So the mouth would be stage 1. Okay. What is going to be the site of digestion for the triglycerides? And that one, you guys probably know from studying your A&P, is going to be the small intestine. Oxidation of alcohols to produce aldehydes or ketone is done by which of the following coenzymes? And coenzymes just means that it's a helper, okay? And so this one is going to be NAD+, because NAD plus a hydrogen ends up being NADH. And that's seen a lot in like the Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle, however you want to talk about it, and everything like that. So that NAD+ is going to be the one that's going to really be involved in the oxidation of alcohols, etc. Where coenzymes A and coenzymes Q, those are more in the electron transport chains. FAD is another type of ATP. It's just immediately broken down. FAD is broken into ATP like immediately in the body, so we don't even really super talk about it. All right. This one is, what is the net gain of ATP generated by glycolysis? And this is going to be +2, okay? So remember how when we were talking about fatty acids and I said everything ends up being in an equal number, and this happens like when we're going to be breaking down those fatty acids and you count the number of carbons and divide it by 2 to figure out how many ATPs are generated, etc. This is all where that comes into play. The net gain of ATPs generated in glycolysis, and glycolysis is just the first part of the whole aerobic cellular metabolism, because there's glycolysis, then there's a citric acid cycle, and then there's going to be the electron transport chain, okay? So glycolysis is the first step, and the majority of our ATP actually happens in the electron transport chain, okay? In the first of the citric acid cycle, how many carbon atoms are removed as CO2 from acetyl-CoA? Okay, so remember when we said the amino group versus the acetyl group, everything like that? Well, we have our carboxyl group, and then we have like the amine group. And so I kind of said when I drew that strong, like that long fatty acid and stuff like that, and we have like that omega group and everything like that. So what we have to remember, and I know this is a really silly way, but we're going to chew two COOHs off the end, okay? So we do 2 carbons off the carboxyl end. So if we have the carboxyl end, then we have the omega end, we're going to be chewing 2 carbons off that carboxyl end for each round of the citric acid cycle. So that's going to be B. Remember, we have omega, our omega ends, which is gonna be like the CH3, CH2, CH2, blah, 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 blah. And then the COOH, we have that alpha carbon, beta carbon, alpha bond, beta bond. So if we're talking about beta oxidation, it's going to be breaking it at that beta bond. And there's actually 2 carbons at that beta bond, where this is going to be like that alpha bond. Okay, so that it all ends up kind of making sense and running together. All right, in stage 3 of metabolism, each glucose molecule that is metabolized produces how many ATPs, how many NADHs, and how many FADH2s. And so that would be the citric acid cycle, right? So phase 1 was glycolysis, citric acid was 2. And so this one's going to be 4 ATPs, 10 NADHs, and 2 FADH2s. okay? And so these are numbers that I would kind of work out and remember. And again, pay attention to if it says an entire round of aerobic metabolism, or just in glycolysis, or just in the citric acid cycle, or just in the electron transport chain, you know, because that's going to end up really getting you if you're not paying attention, right? Right. In each beta oxidation cycle, a 14 carbon fatty acid goes through 6 turns of the cycle, producing how many acetyl-CoA units, and therefore how many ATPs. So the formula that I talked about before and that I would really work is the number of carbons divided by 2 equals the number of acetyl-CoAs. And then the rounds times 14 equals the number of ATP, okay? So we have a 14 carbon fatty acid, and it's going to go through 6 turns of the cycle. And so that is going to be 14 divided by 2 equals 7, right? And so that would be 7 rounds of beta oxidation right? So if we take 7 times 14, then that's going to end up giving us the 84. So 14 divided by 2 is the 7. So that's how we end up getting this 7 number. And then if we take 7 times 14, that ends up getting us 84, okay? And that gives you that number. So these are the 2 formulas that you should really know, is that the number of carbons divided by 2 is the number of acetyl-CoA that's going to be produced. And then also if you take the rounds and you're going to times that by 14, then that's going to be the number of ATP produced, okay? But that's actually 6 because it's acetyl-CoA, and then I'm sorry, I decided to minus 1. I forgot to minus 1 for that rounds, so that's going to give you rounds. So this one would actually be 6 times 14 equals 84. All right, so number of carbons divided by 2 is acetyl-CoA. Rounds is that minus 1. And I kind of remember that, and again, this is the boxing ring analogy. Sorry, I kind of said that wrong first, but if you, you know, in the boxing arena, you have round 1, and so for round 1, you're going to subtract it. So you have the number of acetyl-CoA that it's calculated by the number of carbons divided by 2, and then that would subtract 1 and gives you the number of rounds of beta oxidation that occurred, right? And that would be that times the 14 to give you the 84. Sorry about that. All right. This one can be found on page 652, and this is just kind of a known fact, and that one's going to be 25 to 30 grams of urea. All right. The total number of ATPs generated from the complete oxidation of glucose. So complete means everything, going from glycolysis, the oxidation, to the citric acid cycle, etc., is going to be what? And in this class, we teach 36. Now this number changes depending on which textbook you read from, and always answer based on whatever textbook you're being tested from. In my other full-time, you know, we teach it's 30, and why is the difference? It's all just a difference in math and how people include parts of it and don't include other parts of it. Sorry, didn't mean to make you guys wiggle. All right, for this one, it says which stage of metabolism involves the production of carbon dioxide, and this would be stage 3. And so again, if you look through in your textbook, and carbon dioxide is one of the outputs of the citric acid cycle. All right, where in the cell is the energy produced? Well, the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria, and there's a joke out there about Rihanna, mitochondriana, so I think it's kind of funny. All right, but the powerhouse of the cell is the mitochondria. All right. ADP and ATP each contain nitrogen-containing, oops, you can't see that, bases called adenine and a 5-carbon sugar called ribose. ADP has 2 phosphate groups attached to the sugar, while ATP has what? Well, ADP is adenosine diphosphate. So di means 2. And then ATP is adenosine triphosphate, which equals 3. Okay, so again, it's talking about adenosine triphosphate is going to be 3, where adenosine diphosphate has 2. And actually, fun fact, the energy in ATP is stored in between the bonds. And so when you break off that bond, that's when the energy is released. It's not necessarily like in the actual phosphate. It's like, you know, the adenosine backbone with the 3 phosphates in there, right? When you break one off, that's what actually is going to be releasing energy. Apparently that's energy in my thing. Okay. All right. So this is working stuff backwards. So it says how many turns of the citric acid cycle are required to produce 72 ATP molecules. So remember, if we went back to our rounds, times 14 is the number of ATP. So if we have the, so rounds times 14 equals ATP produced. So if we are going to do this, then we would have to take 72 divided by 14, and that ends up giving you 6. Okay, so that's how it can work backwards, right? All right, and then the last slides of the semester. It's been great. Can't wait to get together with you guys next week, God willing, and listen to your amazing stories, and I'll bring pizza for us. When enough carbohydrates are not available to meet the energy needs, the body breaks down fats. This oxidation of large amounts of fats in the fatty acids can cause what molecules to collect in the liver. And think of what the input was for all of these things before. It was acetyl-CoA, right? So we had to make acetyl-CoA before we got to go into the citric acid cycle and all of that stuff. So we are going to end up having large amounts of fatty acids being broken down to acetyl-CoA, and those can therefore collect in the liver, okay? Last questions. The breakdown of amino acids occurs primarily in what? We were just talking about that right there. And this would also be the liver. All right, and that concludes our biochem. And like I said, I look forward to your presentations. I'll make a little video about expectations, and I will get that out to you too. All right, thanks guys.